I bet we agree on one thing, and that has to do with retirement and what retirement means. And I'd love to wrap our discussion up with
Mhm.
this. What does retirement mean to you?
Um, it's a word that needs to go away. To me, retirement is when we basically are giving up our ability to earn an income, and 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 so you have to be real careful with that. You've got to make sure that you're thoughtful about what you're going to do with your time. Because a sense of purpose gives people meaning, and if people have their sense of purpose wrapped up in their work and then they quit, that's not good. They're not going to enjoy their retirement. And so to me, um, people need to plan for life transitions and quit planning for retirement.
Yeah, I like that. We're
Hmm.
going to continue to go through transitions. And I think,
Right.
the strange thing is, I mean, if we look at the different transitions that we have in our lives,
Hmm.
what's the one that typically lasts the longest, right? It's that you actually plan for. You think about college, right? That's usually one that
Hmm.
comes to mind. Yeah, we've been planning for college for 18 years to be able to fund it for 4.
Right.
And most people aren't thinking about it until 5 years before. But
Hmm.
then you think about retirement, and now we're talking about planning for something that might last 30 years or more. It's hard to plan for,
Right.
and we should be spending more time planning for that than our next vacation. We should be spending more time planning for that than funding college. And we should spend a lot of our time just trying to figure out if retirement is really for us in the first place. So, Carolyn,
Exactly.
thanks
That's
so
the
much
last
for
one.
joining us.
Thank you.
I want to, if there's individuals out there that want to get in contact with you, they want to follow up with you, they want to engage, what's the best way to do that?
Yes, so just go to carolynmcclanahan.com.
Well, easy enough. We
Yeah.
will make sure we put a link right there in the show notes. Carolyn,
Okay.
thank you so much for your time. It was a real pleasure.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.